Greetings and good afternoon to my colleagues in rural Oregon. My name is Caleb Pollard, and I am the Executive Director of Valley County Economic Development in Ord, Nebraska. And I'm here today to talk to you about some methodologies that we've used in our community to really be aggressive in defining a new future for our rural community. We all know that jobs and we all know that investment is a really important part of the national lexicon today. In all of economic development policy. But what I want to talk to you about is a positive story about rural economic development that oftentimes doesn't get brought up in the national media, especially when it comes to the situation that we have within rural Nebraska. We know that our rural places are divested in by the federal government, and we know that comparative to the national scale of things, that most rural places are really struggling in terms of a national economic opportunity. So what I want to talk to you today about is how we've really redefined a very small rural place in the center of the country and tell you a little bit about my personal story and really give you what we hope is a sense of hope for the future. I started my career off right out of college in an urban community in eastern Nebraska, in Lincoln actually. And my wife and I made a decision to return to our rural roots, and we never really ever regretted that decision because we wanted to live in a place where you could have both meaning and purpose and see those tangible impacts of the work that we do on a daily basis have an impact that next day. Valley County is not unique in the fact that for the past 90 years we've experienced population decline. 1920 was the year in which our population was the highest, and since that point in time, outmigration due to urbanization as well as family farm consolidation has really defined a downward trend for all four communities that reside in Valley County, my home community. When I moved to Ord 3 years ago, one of the things that we really tried to do was understand how this pain of declination was having an impact within the community. And I guess the best way to describe to you how we were going to overcome that sort of pain and declination was through a storied fable, or thinking about, for example, the tooth fairy. You know, we all think that when we're kids that we lose teeth and you know, you're going to have some sort of reward for that tooth or that commodity that your mouth happens to produce, and then you get some sort of income from some outside source, this magical fairy that flies in through your window and flies out in the middle of the night, and rewards you for, you know, in my day it was 25 cents, in my kid's day today it's $1 for a tooth. We take that idea way too many times when it comes to our economic development process within rural communities. I think for so long we've had almost an entitlement mindset about how we build our local economies. What's the state? What's the governor? What's the legislature? What's President Obama going to do for us in rural America? And I'm here to tell you folks, there ain't no tooth fairy. What I want to talk to you about is a simple three-step methodology that we've used in rural economic development that has really redefined a future in rural Nebraska that is very much like a lot of other places in the High Plains, Great Plains states, from Canada down to Texas. What we had to do is take a step back and say, does the traditional industrial recruitment model work for communities like Ord and Valley County when it comes to growing our future? We are not on an interstate system. We have a terminal end of a railroad that comes into our community, which is Ord. And for the most part, the rest of our communities are completely disconnected, with the exception of now broadband, to the rest of the world. So what we had to do is take a step back and ask ourselves 11 years ago, how are we going to grow an economy that is very grain belt, ag-based, and define a new future? And so what we really looked at was a model that was very, very specific to 3 steps. Step 1 is an attitude of self-determination. I think this is really critical because it defines your campaign moving forward. An attitude of self-determination is an attitude in which you put the responsibility, you put the onus on yourselves to build your own local economy. You don't put the onus on the federal government or the state government or the WIB board or whoever you're working with, whatever partnership you're working with, to do the work for you. You do that yourself. And so foundationally, 11 years ago, the community leadership within Orden and Valley County said, we're not going to accept a downward trend of economic growth. We're not going to accept the fact that when our kids graduate high school, that's the last time we ever see them. We're not going to accept that just because we're a town of 2,200 people out in the high prairie, that we're not going to do something about these trends. Which leads to step two, which step two is very, very important as well. And step two is building your own resource base. That is capital, cash. How are you going to go out and create new jobs, create new businesses, if you're not building a resource base that is locally controlled? So some examples I want to share with how we've done that is really interesting with respect to how we've done it through the public-private partnership model. First and foremost is take a step back and look at the community in which you reside and say, are there any sort of sacred cows, sacred funds that exist that we can get our arms around, we can get our fingers on and say, you know, I know that this was built a long time ago for a rainy day, but I don't know if anybody else has looked around rural America today, but it's raining in a lot of places. That rainy day is today. There is no such thing as a sacred cow anymore when we're talking about competitiveness of rural communities in the 21st century. We have to be willing to use our resource base, both public tax dollars, yes, tax dollars, and private investment together to create locally controlled investment funds. How we did that in Valley County was very, very simple. 8 years ago, we made our first sales tax loan from our Economic Development Fund that was levied 3 years prior. And in that time period of 8 years, what we've been able to do is go out and fund over $2.2 million to 38 business development projects. Again, in a community of 2,100 today and a county of 4,200. And what that's done is create an investment impact of over $4.5 million. Now, when you take a step back and you say, well, that's pretty amazing, how else, what other type of impact did that have? Is it had this ripple effect in terms of not only increasing the tide for just one or two important ships within our community, those ships being business development projects or businesses themselves, but also ancillary businesses that are interconnected with those. You help one business out and two businesses down the road see an impact. And I'll never forget a story that I like to share when it comes to that type of impact. We made a $35,000 loan to a local metal fabricator who went out and bought a plasma cutter. And I went over to congratulate him on the successful funding award from our organization. And I was sitting in the shop, and what was really amazing to me is that not one but two contractors from the local community were working building his shop so he could put that $35,000 piece of equipment within that facility. That put bread and butter on the tables of two additional families, and that had a very significantly positive impact. Now, you take that story, $35,000, and it had an impact on 2, 3, 4 families, and you times that times the amount of impact that we've had with $4.4 million, $4.5 million now of total investment within our own locally controlled resources. What's also really important about locally controlled resources is that it gives you the leverage to go out and use state and federal funds where you see opportunities to make impact. And so what we've been able to do with our sales tax program is go out and access what we call a buffet of resources so that when we have a project that either comes to town or is emerging from our own community, we have local, state, and federal funds that are available that we can do to meet strategic needs. And so that gets me to my last point is what is really our strategic need? What is our primary focus? And what's really important is that we have to really build on the human capital that exists within our community today, tomorrow, and into the future. And that's a very different economic development model than you traditionally see in other places. For example, we focus entirely our priorities on 3 targets within that human capital: people, existing businesses, and entrepreneurs. So we take that resource base that I talked about, that we've created locally, and we invest in existing businesses, finding the equipment, the employees, and the opportunities to be successful. We talk about using those funds to go out and grow our entrepreneurs, whether they're in 6th, 7th, 8th grade, high school, or whether they're 40 years old and they're tired of the rat race in the city and they want to come back home. We use that resource base to go out and we invest in people that are from our community, that want to be in our community, that are in our community, and the results have been really, really dramatic. I want to give you some figures about the type of impact that we've had with respect to that three-pronged approach. We're talking about in 11 years since economic development was up and started in Valley County, we've seen a countywide impact of a public and private investment over $125 million. What we've also seen is systematic public infrastructural improvements in healthcare and education, in fire protection, and the living environment of our downtown business community. And more importantly, the majority of that investment has been in the private sector. We've seen biofuels growth in our community, and we've also seen entrepreneurship growth. In the last 10 years, we've taken a double-digit population decline down to 5%. That, to us, is incredibly important. It's not the greatest news that there is around, but it is reversing 90 years of declination. That is significant in terms of the mindset and the macroeconomic economy that we see within our local region. We've had an economic job growth rate that's 4 times the state average. We've seen a 40% increase in our household per capita income. Those are tangible economic development impacts on a household by household basis, and that's what really economic development's all about.